All right, what's up YouTube? What's up YouTube? It's your boy JayFlood201 Reacts. All right, back at it again. All right, and this time we are watching a video by TrapMoreRoss. There'll probably be some ads and pop-ups. This is going to be one of my longer streams. We're going to react to it. It's about the Gangster Disciples and how they run Atlanta. All right, I have not watched this before. I love TrapMoreRoss. Or TrapMoreRoss, or whatever the French toast he's calling himself these days. Alright, this is a long one. This is like an hour, so we'll see how long we can stream for. You know, hopefully we get it done. I'm gonna go ahead and hit play, because you already know I keep it true here at 201. If it's whack, I'll let you know. If it's dope, make sure to react to it in the comment section, because this is JayFlood201 Reacts. Add, like, comment, subscribe to me. Definitely follow me on Instagram. Alright. Also, by the way, on Instagram I got a lot of other stuff. Gaming stuff, faith-based stuff, okay? And like fitness stuff too, because I'm in the gym all the time now. Alright, let's get into it.
The city of Atlanta is one of America's most influential cities. The capital and most populated city in the state of Georgia has gained a reputation of being a trendsetter when it comes to American culture. The history of Atlanta being a distribution hub of more than just culture is over 100 years old. The city was originally founded as the end of the line of a major state-sponsored railway, but its location ended up making it the convergence point of many other large railroads. In fact, the name Atlanta itself was actually derived from the Western and Atlantic...
Oh yeah, I might have to go grab my Chipotle. I'm getting some of that Uber Eats in the middle of the video, so if that's the case, just bear with me. Alright, let's go.
Atlantic Railroad that terminated there. But over the next 100 years, Atlanta's role as America's most significant crossing point.
Oh yeah, that's right, yo.
When airplane travel became widespread, Atlanta too became America's premier hub for airborne distribution of goods as well.
In Atlanta, they be like
airport holding the crown
like the perfect place, the perfect crossroads
most years. And perhaps unsurprisingly,
to do like drug trafficking and stuff, isn't that right?
Every minute of every day, some of those things might not be entirely legal. In fact, Atlanta's prime location as a centralized hub, with routes to and from other locations all over America and the world at large, made it a prime location for criminal enterprises. Whether it's the nine-figure dope dealing operation made famous by the likes of BMF,
yo, shout out 50, shout out 50,
Southwest Tea, and Big Meech, moving an alleged $270 million worth of drugs in from Mexico to Atlanta and flooding the United States with product. More recently, dope dealer turned rapper Rallo, who proved to the whole world that the dope game was indeed easier than the rap game, blatantly using private jets to ship huge amounts of drugs and cash all over the United States.
Oh shit!
His activities on social media and in rap videos.
Yeah, I'm in the chat right now
for
here
decades
too.
Now,
Alright,
gangsters have used Atlanta's inherent geographical superpowers to their advantage, building flourishing criminal enterprises. And funnily enough, when you talk about comparisons between the drug game and the rap game, Atlanta is also one of the biggest exporters of culture in the form of rap music. When it comes to rap music, there's arguably no other city that has had as much influence as Atlanta, with it being the birthplace of some of the biggest names in music right now, such as Future, Young Thug, Playboi Carti, and Gunna, as well as some of the most influential rappers of all time historically, like Outkast, Gucci Mane.
Yo, how about that AT Aliens, right? Yo, that shit was fire! Yo, but I'm playing a game also, and I'm in chat, in Discord, so like, if you hear other voices pop up, I feel like I've muted most of them, but my apology. Definitely, all these rap stars, they be coming out of Atlanta. Atlanta's a big deal, and it's also a huge drug trafficking hub. So that's true, you know, it's all very true. You know how TrapMoreRoss or TrapMoreRoss or whatever he's calling himself, he does a lot of research, and I love watching his video. I guess the reason I keep messing up his name is I'm not trying to like throw him shade or anything like that. I thought it was TrapMoreRoss, and then he also has another channel, I guess, where I'm also subscribed to, where it's called TrapMoreRoss, and I guess he does like different videos on each channel, but whatever, yo, it's all good. Alright, let's go back to it.
and the Migos. In fact, many of these Atlanta artists like T.I., Young Jeezy, Gucci Mane, OJ the Juice Man, and Waka Flocka are synonymous with popularizing trap music. The inventive and groundbreaking subgenre of rap music primarily focused on raps about drug dealing and operating out of trap houses, hence the name trap music. But it's not just lyrics about selling drugs out of abandoned houses that made trap music so unique. It was that combined with a unique production style that made use of simple, rhythmic, minimalistic productions with synthesized drums and complex rolling hi-hat patterns, as well as electronic 808 style bass drums, some tuned with a long decay to emit a bass frequency, which made for high-energy rap music that would shake a trap house and feel just as home in a strip club as it would on the corner where trapping was actually taking place. Pioneering producers from Atlanta who helped craft this sound include the likes of Shorty Red, Zaytoven, and Lex Luger. This became a sound that was hugely influential and changed the hip-hop scene in cities all over America and even beyond. Hell, it was even part of one of Kendrick Lamar's most notable arguments in his beef against Drake, when in his hit song Not Like Us, he would mention the fact that Drake has always needed to tap in with the thriving culture of Atlanta's rap scene to benefit his own career, even calling him a colonizer instead of a colleague to his Atlanta rapper friends.
That's big facts, yo. He called him a colonizer and all that. That shit funny as hell.
But you can hardly blame Drake for looking to soak up some sauce in Atlanta's legendary rap scene. In fact, Complex, one of the biggest publications in the rap game, would even name Atlanta as the best city in rap music in a 2023 article. Funnily enough, Chicago was third place on the list, with 3 rappers being placed front and center, being legends of Chicago drill music: Lil Durk, G Herbo, and Chief Keef. Ironically, Chicago drill music was arguably yet another export from Atlanta, with early Chicago drill being hyper-violent gangster rap, where locals would rap about the intense violence going on in their city. And to begin with, they would often use Atlanta trap-style beats borrowed from the likes of Young Jeezy, Waka Flocka, and Gucci Mane. However, over time, Chicago drill would find its own authentic production sound, as the Atlanta drill beats would be tweaked and darkened to better match the vibe of shooting up an op's house rather than trapping in your own. Pioneering Chicago drill.
Ooh, he's right, but I did not realize that it's supposed to be representative of like violence.
Producers like Young Chop would take inspiration from Atlanta trap legends like Shorty Red, Drummer Boy, and Zaytoven, but utilizing more dark.
My bad, guys, about the
synths to build a more
ads,
vibe, and using busy snare drum patterns that hit with a rapid impact reminiscent of gunfire, a common topic in the drill genre. Drill music is much more inspired by the violence of gangs rather than the business side of gangs, as Atlanta trap is. And part of the reason for this is the fact that Chicago is also home to some of the most high-profile African-American gangs in modern American history, such as the Black Disciples, Black P Stones, and Gangster Disciples, with many of the most famous drill rappers in the modern day often.
Yo, aren't they also home to like the Latin Kings? Like, didn't the Latin Kings start out there? I don't know. I think so though. Food for thought. Like a bunch of Latin gangs started in. I think all the Latin gangs except for the Trinitarios started out there, and then obviously like the Mexican gangs like Florencia 13 and 18th Street. Those are West Coast. But Latin Kings, which is a big deal and always has been for a long time, because like Latin Kings were the first ones to have like a bunch of just Latins. Like you could be Mexican, you could be Cuban, you could be Puerto Rican, you could be any of that shit, and then bang Latin King. I'm pretty sure.
And having a heritage in these famous gangs, with Lil Durk, Chief Keef, and King Von famously affiliating with the Black Disciples, G Herbo and Lil Bibby having heritage in the Black P Stones, and the likes of FBG Duck and Ruger having infamous ties to the Gangster Disciples. These urban Chicago gangs have been operating in the streets there for decades, with some gangs having roots that go back as far as the 50s and 60s. But what's perhaps the most interesting thing is that while in many ways Atlanta exported the sound of the streets to Chicago in the form of trap and drill music, in many cases it was actually Chicago gangs that exported the actual violence and gangsterism to the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. So in today's story, we're going to be taking a closer look at how the Gangster Disciples got established in Atlanta, how the gang itself moved and operated between state borders for decades, and the hidden...
Also, if you guys see me like looking away, that's because I'm playing a game right now. I would be streaming the video game, but there's no real point. I don't feel like there's a big audience. I think there's a bigger audience for this stuff. And also, this is just something I like to do. I like to, when I'm doing stuff like this, one sec, guys, I'm about to fight this dude. Alright, yeah, nah, he was awake. He was awake. I thought there was a guy away from his keyboard, and I was about to kill him real quick, and then he woke up. Alright, let's go.
Connections between the GDs and some of your favorite hip-hop stars.
Between the GDs and some of the hip-hop stars, he said? From Chicago to Atlanta.
Strangely, this Atlanta story starts in Chicago, when a large number of African Americans moved into Chicago during the Great Migration from the South, which, as the name implies, was a mass migration of African American people from rural southern parts of the United States to the more urban part of the northern and Midwest part of the country, with reports showing that over 500,000 African Americans moved here during this time, with many moving to the south side of Chicago, especially in Englewood, in hopes to get a job in the thriving meat and steel packing businesses that were operating there. Unfortunately, though, in the following decades, these industries would begin to decline, bringing the families who were dependent on it into hard times.
Many of the industries that had anchored the neighborhood were in a fight for their lives. Manufacturing moved overseas. Environmental regulations grew. Markets shrank. Businesses disappeared, so did jobs. Without work, many people were forced to leave. Neighborhoods that had been stable for generations began to see rental properties, absentee landlords, and abandoned homes.
On top of that, you can probably guess how some of the already established locals felt about these new black families moving in, with racist propaganda circulating in newspapers asking if others would panic if an African American moved in next door. During this time, the state of Illinois would make it close to impossible for these black families to fully integrate and make themselves feel at home in Chicago, and having to deal with things like restrictive covenants.
I shouldn't laugh at that, but like, it just sounds fucking insane these days, right?
As well as redlining, where the banks would refuse to lend out money to areas
where redlining was
black
a real
families
thing.
were
That was a
living.
big
Local
deal.
tensions would boil over when the city announced plans to expand Section 8 housing into the suburbs and in
Alright,
smaller
my food
low-rise
almost
duplexes,
here, y'all.
alongside
Let's
the
do
already
it.
existing high-rises, such as the infamous Cabrini Green housing projects. With all of this going on, it's safe to say that as a black person, you didn't really have the same opportunities as your white counterparts in Chicago. So, young black men who were getting bullied in their new community obviously grew tired of the abuse. They would band together to form a club to fight back against those that were bullying them. These gangs would evolve to be more organized, with one borrowing from religious mythology and calling themselves the Disciples, before eventually changing their name to the more menacing name Devil's Disciples, which by the way has no connection to the Devil's Disciples motorcycle gang with the same name. But anyway, in the years that followed, the Devil's Disciples fought with other gangs in the area, such as the racist gang known as the Uptown Rebels, as well as the Blackstone Rangers and the Egyptian Cobras, which were later known as the Mickey Cobras. Once again, with no correlation to the motorcycle gang of the same name. But one of the founding members of the Disciples organization was a man named David Barksdale, who apparently commanded leadership of his crew at the young age of 14. David Barksdale was often referred to as King David, and if you're a devoted Chiracologist, you would know that
King David!
Von Rap moniker is taken.
Yo,
as well as
that guy caught a gun charge. We're gonna do a reaction video to that too.
To
that
Anyways,
guy
King David
who does
set
all
out
the
to expand
memes
his
who always
Disciples
says
gang,
King
planning
David
to do this by
caught a
bringing
gun
together
charge out
other
here
smaller
in
neighborhood gangs to
Jersey.
band together under the Disciples banner. With their organization
Former
growing, it wouldn't be long
residents,
until they ran
Jersey.
into some ops in the form of the Supreme Gangsters.
Yeah.
The Supreme Gangsters, who are now known as the Gangster Disciples, is a gang that started in 1964 when a group of young men met together at the home of a man called Larry Hoover. Larry and his boys started their own street crew called the Supreme Gangsters, not that kind of Supreme. And from here, they began to beef with the Blackstones and the Egyptian Cobras. But initially, they had no beef with David Barksdale and his disciples. However, as the disciples grew, other smaller gangs joined King David's organization, who would start to go by the Black Disciple Nation. As this group would gain more power, it would also receive more pushback from other gangs, specifically the Black Stone Rangers, a set that emerged out of the Blackstone Rangers, who went to war for dominance with the Black Disciple Nation. Now, the Black Stones were a common enemy for both the Black Disciple Nation and, at the time, the still independent Supreme Gangsters. With the pressures from the Peace Stones rising, the Supreme Gangsters decided that they needed an alliance too. So they did exactly what David and the Black Disciple Nation did and recruited any gang that hated the Black Peace Stones but didn't want to be part of the Black Disciple Nation. Anyone who joined the gang had to add the Gangster moniker to their gang's name, showing just one of the ways that Larry Hoover and the Supreme Gangsters were starting to move just like the Black Disciple Nation. In 1967, on the west side of Chicago, the Supreme Gangsters were gaining popularity, and they would officially start beefing with the Black Disciple Nation in 1968, with this feud reaching its boiling point after multiple assassination attempts on Larry Hoover's life. Luckily, Larry would survive these attacks and continue growing his gang, encroaching on David Barksdale's turf. But soon, in a move unthinkable in today's adversarial Chicago gang politics, the gangs would for a period unite and for a short time become a formidable supergroup with an iron grip on the streets of Chicago. Despite a long-running rivalry between the Supreme Gangsters Gangsters and the Black Disciple Nation, it got to the point where both the
Black
Pistons
Disciple
and the Black
Nation and the
Disciple Nation
Supreme
respected what
Gangsters.
Larry Hoover had built with the Supreme
Alright.
Gangsters, and so they wanted to absorb them in order to grow and fight off the other gangs. Larry Hoover even had a sit-down with David Barksdale and the leader of the Black P-Stones, Jeff Thorpe, with the initial outcome of these talks being a truce with the P-Stones and the Supreme Gangsters instead did a full merger. However, this truce would be short-lived after a May 1969 shooting of 2 Supreme Gangsters that were killed by P-Stones. In response, Larry Hoover would meet with David Barksdale and agree to a full-on merger. This deal united both gangs and created a crew that was then known as the Black Gangster Disciple Nation. Things would run smoothly in the new organization for a few years until 1973, when Larry Hoover ordered the murder of William Young as punishment for stealing drugs and money from one of the crew's dope houses. The shooter who did it ultimately flipped on Hoover, causing the feds to implicate him as the head of the Supreme Gangsters, leading to a judge sentencing him to a whopping 150 to 200 years behind bars. However, Larry Hoover continued to run operations for the Black Gangster Disciple Nation from jail, whilst David Barksdale ran the operations in the streets, with Hoover even trying to model the GDs like a true corporation. Unfortunately, this wouldn't last for long due to the death of David Barksdale, who died in 1974 after a bullet in the kidney. From here, Jerome Shorty Freeman would take over the street side of things for the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, leaving Larry Hoover to try and keep things united behind bars. But sadly, this wouldn't happen because the love for King David amongst his soldiers ran deep, with it seeming like many members stopped respecting Larry Hoover's leadership, which ultimately led to members disrespecting the Supreme Gangster side of the organization. Part of this was because some members were still holding grudges from their war less than a decade earlier before this alliance had been established, and without unified leadership, the gang was starting to fall apart. Larry Hoover had apparently tried to reunite the nation, but he failed. This apparently leading to Don Dirk Acklin bringing back the Black Disciples as one unified but independent gang, as well as Shorty Freeman, who was waging a civil war between the Black Disciples and now opposing Gangster Disciples. Although the timeline isn't exactly clear, it would be around this time when both the GDs and the BDs would begin to develop their own individual identities, going their separate ways, with these sets now being widely known today due to some of the famous rappers with a heritage in these historical organizations, with people like FBG Duck and Ruger proudly representing their GD affiliations, and the likes of Lil Durk and Chief Keef prominently repping the Black Disciples in their music. Anyways, Larry Hoover, who was still behind bars and attempting to organize new alliances amongst gangs in prison, would create a large alliance of incarcerated GDs, BDs, as well as other Latin gangs that went under the banner Folk Nation. But as the 80s came around, Black Disciple Street Captain Jerome Shorty Freeman and enforcer Mickey Bull Johnson were released from prison, giving an ultimatum to members on the streets, and that was to either go full BD under their leadership or join Larry Hoover and go full on GD. For years to come, we would see violent battles between the BDs and GDs, mainly over turf in the lucrative and illegal drug trade in Chicago. It got so bad that the neighborhood of Cabrini Green had a violent crime rate which affected 8 out of every 100 people living there.
The only structure is provided by the gangs, who marked their turf with spray paint and set up sniper posts in high-rise buildings. Last year, 200 people were shot or stabbed in Cabrini. 8 violent crimes.
Yo, Cabrini Green was like crazy. And that's also like all the deaths there helped create like the whole thing, like you know that horror movie, it's like the first horror movie that went Hollywood with a black like main character, and it was a big deal. The one with the bees, it's all like he got a bunch of bees. Fuck, the beekeeper? Nah. Candyman, there we go, Candyman. So Candyman was anyway, Candyman takes place in Cabrini Green, and Cabrini Green is just one of those crazy ass famous fucking places that you hear about. You know? Cabrini Green is crazy. And yeah, Candyman is a classic. It's like one of the first films with all the about with a black main character and all that stuff. Even though the main character is a bad guy, like he's like a scary monster serial killer thing. It's like a hood horror film, and it went mainstream. It went Hollywood. So like that's pretty cool.
For every 100 people.
All right, actually, I gotta be right back. I gotta grab my fucking Chipotle. Okay. My neighbor is way nicer than I remember also. Like, super nice of her. Super, super nice of her. She was like, "Hi, James." I was like, "Oh, shit. How the fuck does she know my name?" And then I was like, "Oh, right. She's my neighbor. She probably knows my name and all this other shit." She was like, "Oh, I'm not sure if it's yours because I had them leave it right outside." Oh, alright, cool, sweet. Alright, let's go for it. Let's go. We're back to it.
And things would continue to go on for years, with it getting so bad that many people couldn't even walk on these streets safely. Meanwhile, in prison, Larry Hoover was trying to clean up his public image by building a persona that seemed more interested in community work rather than gangbanging in the streets. Sadly, this didn't stop the feds monitoring the more nefarious side of the organization, and in 1995, Hoover was hit with fresh new charges, being accused of still running the GD operations from behind bars, with him apparently being nailed due to wiretaps being put on a visitor's badge that was given to everyone who visited Larry Hoover. Larry Hoover ultimately got convicted of his crimes, being given an extra life sentence before being shipped off to the brutal Supermax federal prison in Colorado. With Larry shipped away, the Chicago police would focus on other high-ranking members of the gang. By the end of the 90s, they would arrest GD kingpin Roy Mosley, who was literally caught with over a ton of cocaine. By 2002, 34 more GD members were facing indictments for taking part in drug operations. But despite the efforts of the authorities to shut these gangs down, by this point they were deeply entrenched in the culture of the Chicago streets, and the feds would be playing whack-a-mole with these gangsters, shutting down one set for only more to pop up running things fresh soon after. And it's around this time that the gang began laying roots in other cities and spreading the reach of their criminal network beyond the borders of Chicago, which of course brings us to the location of today's story, Atlanta. While the streets of Chicago have always been deeply associated with gangs and violence, that was by no means the only city in America dealing with criminal enterprises. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, they were dealing with a similar situation, and after the rise of crack cocaine in the 80s, new gangs would emerge. You see, Atlanta became a major export hub for cartels selling the drug in America due to its great geographical position, with DEA Special Agent Chavallo Truesdale saying that Atlanta sits in between the Mexican-US border and the eastern seaboard of the United States, where a lot of these drugs are sold. And if you look at this map, it brings things into perspective a bit more, showing just how perfect Atlanta was as a hub for overseas drug cartels. Obviously, this meant a new opportunity, which sparked the rise of street gangs in Atlanta, such as the Miami Boys, who, as you can tell by their name, came from Miami in 1986, seizing a big chunk of the drug trade going on in Atlanta. The Miami Boys were led by Isaac Big Ike Hicks, who recruited and sent young men to Atlanta to expand their operations. In Atlanta, it was said that an ounce of cocaine was selling for triple the price it was worth in Miami. They would buy product dirt cheap, fresh off the...
Alright, so let me get this right. We got guys coming in from Chicago, linking with cartel plugs, and then the cartel plugs are like, "Yo, you should get some territory in Atlanta, cause y'all are crazy." That's crazy.
That an ounce of cocaine was selling for triple the price it was worth in Miami. They would buy product dirt cheap, fresh off the boat in Miami, and undercut other plugs in Atlanta while still making more profit than them. 2 years later, Detroit's very own Big Meech moved to Atlanta to set up operations and get his own piece of the pie, moving pies, in 1988. Born Demetrius Flannery, Big Meech is the co-founder of the Black Mafia Family, or BMF, a Detroit-born drug trafficking organization who at the time was making major expansions into other states, including Georgia. And as you probably already know, Big Meech and his BMF organization is the main inspiration for the show by the same name, where in it, Big Meech's actual son, Lil Meech, actually plays his dad as the main character of the show. Crazy enough, in season 3 of the show, it even depicts Big Meech moving to Atlanta, and while trying to gain control over the drug trade in the city, Meech and BMF would start a beef with the Miami Killers, or MK for short. It's said by many BMF superfans turned Redditors that MK in the show is based on the real-life Miami Boys. And while there isn't really much depth in information on the beef between the two gangs, one thing that is for certain is that things got very violent on both sides, with reports of multiple murders at the hands of the Miami Boys and BMF playing out in Atlanta. Gucci Mane's lawyer even alleged that BMF ordered the robbery on Gucci Mane, which ended up killing Jeezy's friend Pookie Loke, which is a topic that you can learn more about in a video I made on the situation right at the start of my channel's journey. But anyway, BMF... the Miami boys ran a big chunk of the drug trade in Atlanta for a good time. That is until the early 90s, where in anticipation for the 1996 Summer Olympics, the city began the process of demolishing all of Atlanta's housing projects. Just like how many of the projects were demolished in Chicago in the 80s, this completely changed the demographics and structures of the gang sets in the streets. Gang members were dispersed, and as a result, the demographics of the gangs in Atlanta changed drastically. And at the same time, investigators would take down the Miami boys drug enterprise, which created a void in the Atlanta drug trade. And BMF was there to fill that void, taking over the city of Atlanta. It's said that with BMF in power, most of the drug turf wars stopped, as to them, violence was looked down upon out of concern that it would endanger their lucrative operations. Despite BMF having established a dominant position in the Atlanta dope business, they were by no means the only one trying to get a piece of the action, and soon the Gangster disciples from Chicago would make a move and attempt to establish a serious operation in Atlanta too. The drug business in Atlanta was positively booming, and the BMF era represented a gold rush for gangsters in the state of Georgia. In the following years, Atlanta would see a rise of older, more experienced gang members coming in from numerous other states and cities, with the LA Crips and Bloods along with the GDs and Latin Kings from Chicago. Local law enforcement would say that they believed that the more organized street gangs were coming in an attempt to affiliate with the more loosely organized street gangs that were operating in Georgia at the time. One of the first mentions that I can find of the Gangster disciples being in Atlanta is an article from the NDIC, a piece titled Georgia Drug Threat Assessment. This article goes over the influence of the high-grade imported Colombian snow that was plaguing the state of Georgia, explaining that Mexican cartel groups were the wholesale distributors of the drug in Georgia and that they would supply the local gangs and drug organizations, saying that the Gangster disciples, along with various other gangs, pick up kilogram quantities of the drug to turn into crack before sending it to the streets for retail sale. This would explain that the main consumers of the drug in Georgia were 18 to 25-year-olds. But to understand how the GDs ended up developing a stronghold in Atlanta, far from their original origin city of Chicago, we have to understand how the gang itself is structured, as the GDs would structure their gang after the Italian mob, having different roles like the chairman, who's the leader of the gang, board members who are second in command, the governor, who controls things in each state, and the chief enforcers, whose role was to be more of a hit squad or cleanup crew.
Alright, I did not realize how well organized these guys are. Because while the cartel is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for them, they are essentially the cartel's plug out here in Atlanta. And I mean, that's wild that they can essentially distribute for the cartels in, you know, what is American territory here stateside. And, you know, they are enforcement, distribution, they take care of a lot of factors for the cartel that are, for lack of a better word, like, this is kind of exciting. And like, they have a complete like structure based around like the best, you know, organized crime syndicate here in America, which would be the Italian mafia, you know. And that's not, you know, to throw shade at what are street gangs. That's just to be honest about who has accomplished the most, who has the biggest threat, and who's made the most money historically, you know. Like, when you look back at it, like, historically. Man, never get steak from Chipotle. This is disgusting. What the fuck is that? Oh my god, I almost fell. That shit's crazy.
basically meaning that if anyone messes with the GDs, this is the guy in charge who's handling it. According to a later indictment, a man identified as LH was in prison, but identified as the actual chairman of the GDs, and I think we can safely assume that LH is Larry Hoover. His board member for this region of states, which included Georgia, was Shawntae Craig, aka Sheikh G. Sheikh oversaw the gang's operations across several states, including Georgia and Alabama. In 2004, Chicago native Alonzo Walton, aka Spike G, was appointed as the governor for the new set of Atlanta GDs. Something that was interesting about Alonzo was that, similar to how BMF initially wanted to avoid violence so that the gang could focus on their drug business and make money without attracting the attention of the cops, Alonzo Walton too initially had no intentions of his gang hurting anybody. A lot of them just got out of the violent streets of Chicago and really just wanted to run up money like BMF was doing in the dope game. Sadly, that's not how things tend to play out when push comes to shove, with an Atlanta police investigator actually saying their goal was to leave everyone else, the other gangs, alone, but that's virtually impossible. Atlanta had become a mecca for gangsters who wanted to get things going in the drug trade. And now, with serious gangster disciples hopping over from Chicago to Atlanta to get busy, eventually a violent war would begin to play out in the streets, with Chicago-style violence meeting the Miami-quality cocaine business, ultimately resulting in a bloody war that would shake the streets of Atlanta to its very foundations. But interestingly, the dope dealers weren't the only ones getting money in the city, and as Atlanta was becoming the hotspot for dope boys to run it up, it had also become a huge hub for rap music, with some of the most famous and influential rappers getting a hold of the city's culture, with many ultimately finding themselves towing the dangerous line between the streets and the music.
What is the biggest problem you face as a college student?
Being stressed out about all the things that I have to manage and deal with.
Definitely
With all these new gangs in Atlanta, there was also the rise of gangster rap. Obviously, Atlanta was already a hotbed for music during this time, and interestingly, just like how the drug marketplaces of Atlanta were heavily influenced by the Miami boys and Miami cocaine making its way to the streets of Atlanta, early Atlanta hip-hop had roots in the Miami electro-bass music scene. Uncle Luke of the 2 Live Crew was instrumental in creating the Miami bass genre, and he discovered and aided the careers of many pioneering Atlanta hip-hop producers, particularly DJ Tomb, who was identified as one of the pioneers of the unique Atlanta-centric production sound. Lots of legendary Atlanta musicians boomed through this period with a unique sound that was a far cry from gangster rap. Groups like
I don't know
Outkast
if they
put the
went
South on the
that
map
deep.
with an incredibly creative and
Seems
conscious
like they
approach
just
to rap
went
music.
full-
Then you have the likes of Lil Jon, who got the
steak.
club shaking with the hyper-aggressive nightclub-focused beats that would become known as crunk music. But it would be DJ Tomb's work with iconic rappers with ties to the streets that would birth some of the early examples of southern gangster rap that would later become known as trap music. And it was through these influences that we got some of the most influential gangster rappers of our generation hailing from Atlanta, like T.I., for instance, who dropped his first studio album, I'm Serious, in 2001, which, while it didn't have much commercial success, the album was crucial in ushering in the new subgenre of gangster rap, trap music. Trap music is a form of gangster rap that focuses much more on the money-making and drug-dealing side of the gangster underworld. Fast forward to 2003, T.I., who was dropped from his label after the poor sales of his I'm Serious album, would sign a new deal with Atlantic Records, gearing up to drop his next studio album with the fitting title, Trap Music. An album that was literally recorded in the back of a beauty salon. This album was...
That's dope. I think that's the one that the movie is based on. Because doesn't he have like a whole movie based on like him and his rise? Like, or is that like based on someone else? It's called like Hustle and Flow or something. Anyway, tough ass movie. Great mixtape.
Was commercially and critically acclaimed and really gave a voice to the trap that this music was inspired by. 2 years later, in 2005, Young Jeezy, aka The Snowman, would begin releasing trap music with heavy inspiration from the white powders that were flooding Atlanta.
Young Jeezy.
And making the gangsters there rich. Jeezy would push trap music even further with the official release of his iconic Gangsta Grillz mixtape Trap or Die, which basically solidified trap music as a subgenre in the rap game. Jeezy was a known Crip from Macon, Georgia, a place that we'll visit later in the video, but shortly after Jeezy, another Atlanta trap legend would emerge named Gucci Mane, who in May of 2005 would drop...
Wait, what? Motherfucker was a Crip? I did not know that. Yo. What? Young Jeezy is a Crip. That's wild sauce. Like, that's super wild sauce. That's crazy. I did not know that, bro.
his album titled Trap House, an album that was Gucci's portrayal of his time in the streets of Atlanta slanging dope out of his trap house, and a cover art which quite literally showed him on the phone, likely with a client outside of his trap house. Gucci actually collaborated with the young Jeezy on the track Icy, and this song played a huge role in sparking a beef between the two, with a disagreement over the song leading to a bitter feud that saw Jeezy putting a bounty on Gucci's chain, and a hit squad ambushing Gucci, resulting him in killing a close friend of Jeezy and BMF affiliate Rocky Loke in self-defense. Interestingly, the affiliations of Atlanta gangster rappers or trap musicians would play into their musical personas too. That said, Gucci Mane is associated with the Blood Gang, with Clem, Jeezy's right-hand man during this time, claiming that Gucci Mane only started claiming.
What? Gucci Mane is not blood. I mean, he might be associated with him, but I've never seen him bang blood. Like, that's crazy. I did not know that. I did not know that. Like, that's super wild, bro.
Claiming the Bloods because they were claiming Crip.
You know, you guys, all these Crip dudes are in Atlanta, and I know at one point, you know, you had mentioned that a lot of dudes started to claim blood, kind of.
Yeah, because you gotta understand, we was running around painting the city blue. I'm talking about the whole crew. Everybody's in blue. If you were Crip or not, everybody was in blue. And that's how we ran around the city of Atlanta. And like I said, when I first got there, I didn't see no gangs like that. I seen claiming they block, east side, the west side, the SWATs, all that shit. But once we started doing that shit, in my eyes, that shit just went haywire. Cause you had Gucci Mane them start claiming blood. And
meanwhile in Atlanta, there were also 3 young boys living and listening to what Gucci Mane was rapping about, studying his tendencies and gearing up to take over trap music and bring it to a whole new level. Yes, I'm talking about the Migos, the rap supergroup who started their rise in the rap game in 2009 under the original name Polo Club until they changed their group name to the Migos in 2010. The Migos would actually go on to collaborate with Gucci Mane frequently throughout the years, and early on in his music career, Offset from the Migos would actually claim affiliation to the Gangster Disciples in music videos, songs, and social media posts. There's a September 2014 song, Trap Dab, where Offset raps that his crew banged.
I've had this ad blocker for 1 week, and it's already blocked over 1,000 ads. Meet Pi, a Chrome extension that blocks ads, and it's completely free. What's really crazy is that if you opt in, Pi will actually pay you to see ads. And if it sounds too good to be true, trust me, it's not. It has thousands of 5-star reviews, plus they have a visual mode that lets you watch your ads disappear from your screen.
GD. And then we have the February 2015 song Cross the Country, where Offset raps that his crew rep the Gangster Disciple Nation and throw up the Forks. The Forks, also known as the Rakes, is a GD hand symbol which represents the unity of the crew.
Not 2 G's smiling like like that's hilarious. Love 2 though. Fucking love him. Probably one of my favorite like drill rappers out of New York. Like I know that he beefs with like some of the other really talented guys out of New York, but that whole Suburban and then Suburban and No Suburban, dope. Fucking dope.
You can see New York rapper and fellow Gangster Disciple 2 G's throwing up in this photo. And in this photo, you can see Offset and Takeoff from the Migos throwing up rakes in a club. Now, some people claim that Offset and the fellow Migos are just fake GDs and falsely claim the gang, like in this video where Atlanta GD Champ Young calls out Offset for claiming to have a bunch of GDs whilst he was beefing with King Yella.
Then you get into it with King Yella talking about you got GDs, acting all tough. You don't come around, you don't pay dues, never came to no meetings, none of that shit. You went to one concert in Tennessee through the GODN Entertainment, through Rap A Lot. You know what I'm saying? You was on the books for that. Other than that, you ain't did shit for the nation.
But the Migos' history with the gang dates far back all the way to 2011, when the Gwinnett County Police Department, along with the ATF, conducted an 8-month crackdown on the Gangster Disciples in the area. 49 people went to jail due to this sweep, with 2 of those people who got arrested actually being Offset and Quavo from the Migos. You see, the gang would operate out of the Bradford apartment complex at 100 Castor Drive in Norcross, Georgia, and detectives would say that the other residents in the complex would have to live in fear of the GDs, saying that we had a lot of concerned residents coming and tell them that they were afraid to call the cops, stating it was common knowledge that after the police left, the GDs would set the tone that if you ever did that again, they were going to rob you, or even worse, shoot you. So now you know the deep ties that Atlanta drug gangs have with the musicians making the trap music that provided the soundtrack to the trapping going on in the streets. Let's take a closer look at how the Atlanta GDs ended up going from focusing on trapping to a violent war that had the Atlanta streets shaking in its boots. Once the Gangster disciples decided to set up shop in Atlanta, the senior leadership was cemented and the crew were ready to get active in the streets. Alonzo Walton, aka Spike Lee, was appointed to be the governor of the new set of Atlanta GDs, and the plan was to focus on business rather than violence to get the trap booming and keep the police out of their business. And things would run smoothly for a few years, with the GDs really
Yo, yes or no, he look hella light skinned, bro. Like, he looks, I don't know, man. When you think GD, you think like, I don't know. It's no big deal. I mean, I'm white, but that guy, the governor, when you think GD, you wouldn't think him. You know what I'm trying to say? That's all.
Stacking their money. That was until a few GDs out of Marietta, Georgia.
Probably beneficial for him in a leadership position because he doesn't look like a leadership position type gangbanger. I guess that probably helps. Like, the more I'm learning about this shit, the more I realize, like, all the dudes that really claim stuff and bang stuff and, like, look all tough and have a bunch of tattoos, they're all foot soldiers, bro. And they just bang that shit because they were incarcerated for a long time. The guys who are actually on the streets making money aren't, like, loud like that. You know what I'm saying?
Made a horrible decision. The three men we're talking about are 24-year-old Harvey Rux Hogans from New York City, 28-year-old Alfonso J. Rock Watkins from Pittsburgh, and 29-year-old Derek L. Kemp from Marietta, Georgia. These guys would make the decision to kill Derek Gray, aka Dirt, who was just a local street dealer trying to provide for himself and his pregnant wife. Apparently, a few days before the murder, Derek Gray would text Alfonso and ask him if he had weed, to which Alfonso told him that he was all out, but he would send somebody that did to pick Derek up. Then, on July the 1st, 2011, Derek Gray would borrow $1,000 from his brother, telling him that he was going to pick up marijuana from his longtime plug, Alfonso Watkins. And at around 9 p.m. later that day, Gray would leave his house with at least $1,000. The last call that he made was to Derek Kemp, which was at 9:58 p.m. Phone records show how both men, along with Alfonso Watkins, were located near the Circle 75 Parkway in Smyrna, Georgia. They would meet up to do the deal, with Gray hopping in the back.
Wait, so these guys killed somebody for $1,000? Oh my god.
That's when Rux would pull out his gun, pointing it at Gray and demanding his cash. Gray would pull out a gun of his own and shoot Rux, who then shot Gray, killing him. Kemp and Hogans would drive towards Circle 75 Parkway and dump Gray's body, and the two GDs would drop Hogan off outside of a man named Michael Sanders' house. Hogan would ask Sanders to use his phone to call an ambulance as he had been shot. This was around 10:30 p.m. and after he didn't come home that night, Derek Gray's wife would start to worry, calling him and his friends, and she would eventually file a missing persons report early in the morning of July the 2nd. Meanwhile, the Fulton County Police were responding to a call about a burning car, and when they got there, they would see a Ford Taurus which was burnt so badly they couldn't even tell what color it was. Around that same time, a DeKalb County police officer had actually visited Derek Kemp as he called in to report that he sold his mum's Ford Taurus that had been stolen. Kemp would tell the officer that he last saw the vehicle the night before around 9 p.m. Police would later discover that the burned vehicle was Kemp's Ford Taurus. Police would then recover Gray's body after a woman called in saying that she saw a dead body while she was out on a walk near the Mission Gallery apartments. He had multiple gunshot wounds to his chest, buttocks, knee, and thumb, and several .38 caliber bullets were recovered from his body. Subsequently, also on July the 2nd, Watkins had sent a text message asking the recipient if they wanted to buy a gun, specifying in another message that it was a .38 special and a snub.
Why do they still have these text messages, bro?
45. Watkins would even snap a photo of Gray's .45 Taurus revolver, which police would later find and confirm had belonged to Gray. Derek's death would hit his family and friends hard, with someone around him making a Facebook page to commemorate his life. In this post, they would express their guilt, feeling like him and Smoke should have been there with Derek that day, saying that they caught a flat tire and sadly couldn't make it. In December of 2011, Alfonso Watkins would get locked up where he shared a pod with fellow gang member Steve Lewis. But what Watkins didn't know was that Lewis was actually working for the police. Watkins would end up telling Lewis everything from start to finish, and Lewis would then take his info and give it to investigators. The three GDs would get life in prison for the murder of Derek Gray, and Derek Gray's friends would take to Facebook to celebrate the guilty verdict, explaining how it brings them joy and pain at the same time. Ultimately, the initial plan of simply moving dope and staying out of the way had gone out the window for this group of Georgia GDs. Perhaps they'd gotten greedy, because robbing other drug dealers and the resulting violent crime put the group in the crosshairs of local law enforcement. Ultimately, senior leadership in the GDs would be furious about the violence and additional police attention that had been brought to the table. But now, it was too late, and the top GDs running Atlanta would need to come up with a plan to try and correct course for the crew now that the block was so hot.
Wait, so that they're just like a small scale robbery crew? Like, how are you gonna kill somebody and rob somebody for $1,000? They must have thought this was gonna be a quick come up and that he wasn't gonna have a blower with him, because he literally fired back. He literally shot at them back to protect his own. How stupid can you be, bro? Let's go rob somebody who's strapped, and for so little money that it's like, if I spend the rest of my life in jail or if they fire back, it's like I'm gonna look like an idiot. Bro, like that's what shocks me a lot of the time, because I've been robbed for very, very little money too. And like, really what it is you're putting yourself around broke ass, whack ass people, and you're hanging out with people that would do a whole lot for not a whole lot. Like, they really are not the brightest bulbs in the bunch. And on top of that, they'll take a major risk for very little reward. Now, in my situations, they got away with it. You know, I didn't tell the police or anything like that. But it was for very little money, to the point where it was like, I'm feeling good because I didn't really lose too much, and I get to walk away with, you know, my health and my life. Another time I did get, you know, pretty badly injured, but like, you still get to walk away with your life. And when you feel like they got guns or whatever it is, or they're threatening your life, a couple $100, no big deal, bro. You can keep that. Like, you can have that, bro. Because that's how bad, like, you're messed up. Like, you messed up to the point where you could catch an attempted murder charge for like $1,000. In this situation, a full-blown murder charge? Crazy. Crazy, bro. Crazy. Like, it's insane.
The governor, Alonzo Watkins, was not happy about the murders that his gang had just committed, so he would recruit Donald Glass, aka Smurf, and Kevin Clayton, aka OGKK, as chief enforcers for the gang in early 2012. They would create what's known as the Hate Committee, a ruthless group who would act as a sort of cleanup crew, with the Hate Committee being there to check anybody who had become out of line in the GDs. Basically, if you acted up, the Hate Committee was coming to have a stern talk with you. Both Smurf and OGKK would help to grow the committee over the following years. OGKK was actually a rapper with a decent buzz in the Atlanta area, with his biggest song War having over 250,000 views at the recording of this video. In the music video for the song, you can see a bunch of men wearing GD attire, blue jackets with a big GD Star of David, and GD written right in the middle, drawing up the rakes, while OGKK raps about finessing his ops and being a GD for life. Honestly, the song's pretty good, and it kind of reminds me of Jeezy and that early 2000s Atlanta rap scene. Ironically, however, despite the senior leadership's commitment to try and rein in the violent tendencies of the gang, with a name like the Hate Committee, it would be hard to imagine their goal being achieved. And ultimately, what happened next would see yet more attention being brought to the group as a result of violence playing out in the streets. Interestingly, this time with the gang targeting a so-called gangster rapper who wasn't even from Atlanta, as a result of what they felt was disrespectful lyrics referring to the Gangster Disciple Nation.
What? They beefed with Rick Ross? I thought Rick Ross was like a fucking... a corrections officer, bro.
While trap music had boomed in Atlanta through the noughties, with people like Young Jeezy having close affiliations to the BMF drug empire, and in the 2010s when the Migos took over, showing off some very low-key ties to the Gangster Disciples. While the Gangster Disciples had intended to stay low-key themselves and quell the violence in their city to focus on business, they would ultimately fall into temptation when they felt other out-of-towners were disrespecting their gang's heritage and history. Looking for a way to make some noise in the streets, OGKK got an idea while listening to the Rick Ross song BMF, which stands for Blowing Money Fast, as well as being a tribute to the Atlanta-based drug dealing operation. In particular, in the opening lines of the song, Rick Ross says, "I think I'm Big Meech, Larry Hoover, whipping work, hallelujah." And as you know from earlier in the video, Larry Hoover was the founder of the Gangster Disciples, and Big Meech is the notorious leader of the Atlanta drug runners, the BMF. Now, Rick Ross likely thought that he was paying homage to these street legends through his music, but the problem with Rick Ross is that his street credentials have always been in question. His past time working as a correctional officer had made many believe that he was in fact a fake gangster. While to Rose's credit, in his brilliant autobiography Hurricanes, he explains how he took the job as a CEO in an effort to lay low after the Miami-based drug cartel he was a part of was swept by the cops. But regardless of the intention, OGKK would apparently feel a way about this casual reference to the founder of his gang, but would initially give Rick Ross a pass.
This G's come from all over talking about this right here. Hey Rick, straight up, you know what you did first time we gave you a pass on the Larry Hoover Big Meek song.
Rick Ross would have gotten away with this accidental disrespect, but that was until Rick Ross announced his MMG tour with artists Meek Mill, Wale, and French Montana, as well as the artwork for his latest mixtape, The Black Bar Mitzvah, in which the album art depicts his head in the front of the Star of David, a symbol which has a deep-rooted history in a bunch of different cultures, religions, and ideologies, but specifically the Gangster disciples. OGKK, who didn't take a liking to Rick Ross's album cover, would then take to YouTube to send a stern warning to Rick Ross in a video that went viral in the rap community, titled Rick Ross in Trouble with the GDs in Georgia, this video being an on-camera rebuke aimed at Rick Ross from the Georgia GDs.
That's see that right now? Do. It ain't nothing but 3 people that rock this star, the Jews, GDs, Illuminati. GD folk! GD folk! You're not Jew, you're not GD. So I guess the Illuminati got you. Disciple! Disciple!
And in the video, he would even say that all of Rick Ross's artists on his MMG label were in trouble as well.
Pulling up on you, we pressing up on you the whole Maybach. Music. Don't matter who in Maybach. Everybody on your label is in trouble.
They were letting it be known that the GDs were indeed on Rick Ross's tail and that pressure wouldn't stop until a check was cut, basically saying that they were not going to stop harassing him until they got the money they wanted.
Meek Mills, everybody, G, nothing personal, but tell your boss man you gotta get that check, boy, cause y'all in trouble. GD funk! GD funk!
And they would even end the video with all the GDs screaming an F Rick Ross chant.
Rick Ross! Rick Ross! Rick Ross! Rick Ross! Rick Ross! Rick Ross! Rick Ross!
A few weeks later, on November the 9th, 2012, the Florida GDs would come out with a video of their own, letting Rick Ross know that they need their cash.
You see it, boss? You know what I'm saying? Rick Ross. You know what I mean? We need that cash. We need that cash now. We need that cash right now. MBK.
Also saying that as a man, you have to honor your obligations, and that Rick Ross hasn't done so.
As a man, you're supposed to honor your obligations, and therefore you gon' do so. Until you do, you gon' have to deal with the mob.
And 9 days after that, on November the 18th, 2012, a group of North Carolina GDs would put out a video with the exact same sentiment as the video from the Georgia and Florida GDs. Things had gotten critical for Rick Ross, and now he was getting pressed by gangster disciples all over America, furious that he was misusing the iconography of their gang for his personal gains. Then, a few weeks after this video, it would be announced that Rick Ross had actually cancelled 2 shows of his tour that were in North Carolina, and the next day, he would actually cancel the rest of his tour. At this point, all of the media outlets were saying that Ross cancelled his tour because of the recent gang threats coming his way, but in a December 2012 interview, Ross would actually go on record to say that he did not cancel the initial North Carolina dates, and that actually the promoter did, claiming that he would then cancel the rest of the tour due to this quote-unquote bad business.
So the other day I woke up and realized 2 more dates had been canceled, so I just felt like there was some power that I needed to take away from homie, so I canceled the rest of the dates.
Also letting it be known that no check is getting cut to the gangsters trying to intimidate him.
So if you scream and cut a check, we need a check, ain't no checks getting cut. Ain't never no checks getting cut. I don't play those games.
About 5 weeks after this interview, on January the 27th, 2013, Rick Ross would be in Miami, specifically at Club Live, to celebrate his 37th birthday. And he was even photoed partying with Diddy, so you know he had a wild night. Then, early on January the 28th, 2013, after a night of partying, Rick Ross would get hungry. So he and his girlfriend at the time, Shantaria El Morang El, would go on to the Floridian restaurant on Los Olas Boulevard. He would then leave the diner at around 5 a.m, hopping in his Rolls Royce. Ross would drive off, and that's when a still unknown man would shoot up his car, hitting it close to 24 times. Ross reportedly tried to flee the shooting, but ended up crashing his car into an apartment building near 15th Avenue and Las Olas Boulevard. Nobody was injured in the shooting and subsequent crash, but a number of businesses in the area were damaged by stray bullets. Now, apparently, Rick Ross wouldn't cooperate with the detectives, so they would never find out who did the shooting, but due to how close this was to the warning videos and cancelled tour, media outlets would start linking the shooting to the GDs. This was ultimately a close call for Rick Ross, but as far as I'm aware, nobody was ever caught for this incident, and despite the speculation that the GDs were not necessarily implicated in the shooting, it's an eyebrow-raising coincidence that really begs the question, did insulting the Atlanta GDs nearly cost Rick Ross his life? We might never know, but this was yet another chapter of violence that was connected to the Atlanta GDs that ultimately proved that staying out the way and focusing on business wasn't that simple. And sadly, as time went on, there would be yet more feuds involving the Atlanta GDs, and soon they would even end up embroiled in another beef with another set of gangsters that had migrated from another.
Yo, this is getting crazy. That stuff about fucking Rick Ross was pretty dope. I mean, obviously, if you can read between the lines, unless he had some sort of personal beef, because whenever there's like a personal beef going on, I always tend to think that that's more likely, you know, when it comes to gunplay. Like if you're arguing with your girlfriend or something, like, I hate to say it, but like usually it's that. It's usually not like the gangsters that are on the fucking internet threatening you. But just to see him cancel those tour dates and the timing of it all, it's too much of a coincidence in my mind. You know what I'm trying to say? Because, like, he didn't have any personal beef going on at that time, besides what they were saying about the stuff with the GDs, you know? So, like, I think because of that, it was probably the stuff with the GDs that got him shot at in Miami. Like, unless you can prove to me that there's something else going on, I'm like the one of like this, you know, the most obvious explanation is usually the correct explanation. Yeah. The most obvious explanation is usually the right one. And that stuff about Rick Ross is fascinating. That shit is dope. Like, that shit really gangster, bro.
Another American city.
Let's get back to it. Also, let me know in the comments how the audio is. You know, like, this is my first time streaming at length like this, with like what would be the audio playing while I react to things. So let me know how the audio is, because if the audio is fucked up while I'm, like, if you can't hear my mic over the sound, let me know.
Established. And without unified leadership, the gang was starting to fall apart. Larry Hoover had apparently tried to reunite the nation, but he failed. This apparently leading to Don Dirk Acklin bringing back the Black Disciples as one unified but independent gang, as well as Shorty Freeman, who was waging a civil war between the Black Disciples and now opposing Gangster Disciples. Although the timeline isn't exactly clear, it would be around this time when both the GDs and the BDs would begin to develop their own individual identities, going their separate ways, with these sets now being widely known today due to some of the famous rappers with a heritage in these historical organizations, with people like FBG Duck and Ruger proudly representing their GD affiliations, and the likes of Lil Durk and Chief Keef prominently repping the Black Disciples in their music. Anyways, Larry Hoover, who was still behind bars and attempting to organize new alliances amongst gangs in prison, would create a large alliance of incarcerated GDs, BDs, as well as other Latin gangs that went under the banner Folk Nation. But as the 80s came around, Black Disciple Street Captain Jerome Shorty Freeman and enforcer Mickey Bull Johnson were released from prison, giving an ultimatum to members on the streets, and that was to either go full BD under their leadership or join Larry Hoover and go full on GD. For years to come, we would see violent battles between the BDs and GDs, mainly over turf in the lucrative and illegal drug trade in Chicago. It got so bad that the neighborhood of Cabrini Green had a violent crime rate which affected 8 out of every 100 people living there.
The only structure is provided by the gangs, who marked their turf with spray paint and set up sniper posts in high-rise buildings. Last year, 200 people were shot or stabbed in Cabrini.
200.
8 violent crimes for every 100 people.
And things would continue to go on for years, with it getting so bad that many people couldn't even walk on these streets safely. Meanwhile, in prison, Larry Hoover was trying to clean up his public image by building a persona that seemed more interested in community work rather than gangbanging in the streets. But sadly, this didn't stop the feds monitoring the more nefarious side of the organization, and in 1995, Hoover was hit with fresh new charges, being accused of still running the GD operations from behind bars, with him apparently being nailed due to wiretaps being put on a visitor's badge that was given to everyone who visited Larry Hoover. Larry Hoover ultimately got convicted of his crimes, being given an extra life sentence before being shipped off to the brutal Supermax federal prison in Colorado. With Larry shipped away,
no, not the ADX Florence. Yeah, look, oh man, yo, that shit is crazy. I drove by it when I was living out there in Colorado. This is a massive structure. I mean, it is an entire town, bro. Like, fuck a town. This thing is like a small city of what is a penitentiary. It's insane. It's nuts. And besides its physical structure being so intimidating, there's nothing. Like, if you were to ever somehow get out and run, you're not going anywhere. There is nowhere to go. bro. You are in the middle of nowhere. Essentially, you are thrown into the deepest, darkest hole imaginable. This is where, like, real criminals go to die. It's crazy.
Chicago police would focus on other high-ranking members of the gang. By the end of the 90s, they would arrest GD kingpin Roy Mosley, who was literally caught with over a ton of cocaine. By 2002, 34 more GD members were facing indictments for taking part in drug operations. But despite the efforts of the authorities to shut these gangs down, by this point they were deeply entrenched in the culture of the Chicago streets, and the feds would be playing whack-a-mole with these gangsters, shutting down one set for only more to pop up running things fresh soon after. And it's around this time that the gang began laying roots in other cities and spreading the reach of their criminal network beyond the borders of Chicago, which of course brings us to the location of today's story, Atlanta. While the streets of Chicago have always been deeply associated with gangs and violence, that was by no means the only city in America dealing with criminal enterprises. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, they were dealing with a similar situation, and after the rise of crack cocaine in the 80s, new gangs would emerge. You see, Atlanta became a major export hub for cartels selling the drug in America due to its great geographical position, with DEA Special Agent Chavallo Truesdale saying that Atlanta sits in between the Mexican-US border and the eastern seaboard of the United States, where a lot of these drugs are sold. And if you look at this map, it brings things into perspective a bit more, showing just how perfect Atlanta was as a hub for overseas drug cartels. Obviously, this meant a new opportunity, which sparked the rise of street gangs in Atlanta, such as the Miami Boys, who, as you can tell by their name, came from Miami in 1986, seizing a big chunk of the drug trade going on in Atlanta. The Miami Boys were led by Isaac Big Ike Hicks, who recruited and sent young men to Atlanta to expand their operations. In Atlanta, it was said that an ounce of cocaine was selling for triple the price it was worth in Miami. They would buy product dirt cheap, fresh off the boat in Miami, and undercut other plugs in Atlanta while still making more profit than them. 2 years later, Detroit's very own Big Meech moved to Atlanta to set up operations and get his own piece of the pie, moving pies, in 1988. Born Demetrius Flannery, Big Meech is the co-founder of the Black Mafia Family, or BMF, a Detroit-born drug trafficking organization who at the time was making major expansions into other states, including Georgia. And as you probably already know, Big Meech and his BMF organization is the main inspiration for the show by the same name, where in it, Big Meech's actual son, Lil Meech, actually plays his dad as the main character of the show. Crazy enough, in season 3 of...
Didn't we already see this, bro? Where did we get...
OGKK's tough stance on Rick Ross disrespecting the GDs had gained him a lot of attention and respect in the streets and on the internet. Riding high off just going viral, OGKK wanted to shoot a music video, and he would decide on February the 16th, 2013 to take Shantae Craig, Donald Glass, and a bunch of GDs to shoot this video in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Atlanta, the by stray bullets.
Yeah, yo, I think that we left off like here. Alright, I think that this video got fucked up and skipped around.
There would be yet more feuds involving the Atlanta GDs, and soon they would even end up embroiled in another beef with another set of gangsters that had migrated from another American city.
Yo, versus the Bloods and the Crips, I'm dead.
OGKK's tough stance on Rick Ross disrespecting the GDs had gained him a lot of attention and respect in the streets and on the internet. Riding high off just going viral, OGKK wanted to shoot a music video, and he would decide on February the 16th, 2013 to take Shantae Craig, Donald Glass, and a bunch of GDs to shoot this video in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Atlanta, The Bluff. If you watch my video on Rollo, the rapper slash drug dealing phenom, you would know that The Bluff is known to be a drug infested part of Atlanta with a very high crime rate, with the name of The Bluff literally standing for better leave, you effing fool. And part of these GDs that would go to The Bluff was a man named Lewis Mobley, who was an enforcer and part of the hate committee. While filming the video, 17-year-old Jermaine Higgins, who was rocking a red jacket, would spot the GDs. He would then walk in front of the camera and taunt these gang members, apparently saying the word black to the GDs, which means blood love all the time, signifying his gang ties to the Bloods. Feeling disrespected, Mobley would then follow Higgins.
So what the fuck did he do?
and a bunch of GDs to shoot this video in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Atlanta, The Bluff. If you watch my video on Rollo, the rapper slash drug dealing phenom, you would know that The Bluff is known to be a drug-infested part of Atlanta with a very high crime rate, with the name of The Bluff literally standing for better leave, you effing fool. A part of these GDs that would go to The Bluff was a man named Lewis Mobley, who was an enforcer and part of the hate committee. While filming the video, 17-year-old Jermaine Higgins, who was rocking a red jacket, would spot the GDs. He would then walk in front of the camera and taunt these gang members, apparently saying the word black to the GDs, which means blood love all the time, signifying his gang ties to the Bloods. Feeling disrespected, Mobley would then follow Higgins into a store to talk with him and subsequently shoot him. Higgins survived the shooting and was taken to Grady Memorial Hospital. But then, 2 days later on February the 8th, 2013, investigator Pierre Joseph would visit Grady Memorial Hospital, where Higgins told him that the person who shot him was wearing a GD jacket. On February the 20th, 2013, investigator Joseph would return to Grady Memorial.
He goes, the person who shot me is wearing a GD jacket? I swear, like, following this stuff about, like, gangbangers and shit, sometimes you just gotta laugh, because you're literally just like, yo, these guys are fucking fools sometimes. Like, they are just, the shit they do, sometimes it's just, like, full-blown dumb. Let me wear my gang jacket when I shoot this guy.
Hospital, this time with an array of photos, and he would ask Higgins to identify his shooter, which he would identify Lewis Mobley as the shooter. On February the 22nd, 2013, police were conducting surveillance on Mobley's apartment, which they would then see him exit with his 8-year-old daughter and enter a minivan. Police would follow the vehicle, eventually attempting to pull them over on the I-20 expressway. The vehicle looked like it was going to stop, but then sped off, taking the police on a high-speed chase down the expressway. Police ultimately were able to make the car spin out and prevent it from driving, and Mobley was then arrested, eventually getting a whopping 40 years in prison for his involvement in that shooting. Sadly, it wouldn't be the only one. Although they were the one who shot Jermaine, OG, KK, Smurf, and the rest of the hate committee were obviously upset that a Blood gang member just snitched on a GD, leading to his arrest. About a year would go by, and then James Hightower decided to send a message. Hightower would hit up Anthony Bowers, a local dealer from the area, who happened to be a Blood, arranging to meet him and buy some dope. Anthony and his friend Demetrius Cosby, along with Demetrius's girlfriend Maisha Brown with him. They were just hanging out and figured they would catch a ride home from Anthony after he finished the sale. Anthony would drive towards the discount mall in Fulton County and then back into the driveway of an abandoned house behind the shopping center. Maisha was in the passenger seat and Demetrius was in the back laying down with his head behind the passenger seat. That's when James Hightower would approach the car from the street, heading towards the driver's side window, which wasn't working. Anthony would lower the back window and hand a bag of drugs out to James. James would reach in his pocket and hesitate. Demetrius was looking directly at James when he would see a gun and warn Anthony. He started to drive away, but James would begin to shoot, with 4 bullets hitting Anthony in the head, torso, and shoulder, causing him to die instantly. Demetrius was hit as well, and he would black out, and when he would gain consciousness, the car was rolling out of the driveway across the street because Anthony's foot was still stuck on the gas pedal. The car would crash into a ditch, and the bullets would stop. Maisha saw James walking towards the car, and Demetrius told her to play dead. James would fire 4 more shots into the vehicle. One of the bullets hit Demetrius, paralyzing him from the waist down, but luckily, Maisha wasn't hit and able to call 911. She would give a description of the shooter, saying he was a black man who was wearing a black hoodie and jeans. An officer had seen a man matching that description walking down a nearby road just before arriving at the crime scene. The officer would then go out looking for the man he just saw, and he would find James, who at the time was wearing a black hood and jeans. When the officer began to frisk James, he ran away, and the officer would chase him through an apartment complex. The officer would then find him lying on the ground and arrest him. Police would find his phone and a 9mm gun in the woods right near where James was arrested. Officers would then show Maisha a photo of James, to which she confirmed he was wearing the same clothes as the man that shot at her, Demetrius, and Anthony. Although later, she was not able to identify James in a 6-photo lineup. Demetrius was hospitalized for his injuries, and a few weeks after the shooting, a detective interviewed him for the first time, and he was able to identify James as the shooter in a 6-photo lineup. James Hightower was later sentenced to life plus 45 years for the murder of Anthony Bowers and attempted murder of Maisha Brown and Demetrius.
Grammarly is a must-have for all students. For example, when I'm writing emails to professors or any other writing tasks such as essays
they were civilians trying to get
my writing through Grammarly. For example, they help you
ride home.
Topics.
Cosby. Obviously not happy about the situation, the Bloods from Atlanta would retaliate, killing James Hightower's son in retaliation for what he did to Anthony Bowers.
They killed his son.
For the GDs to give a green light for all Blood gang members in the Atlanta area. Things were spiraling out of control for the Atlanta GDs. Now, the original intentions of being a peaceful, business-minded organization were long gone, and they were waging war with various opponents all over the city. But interestingly, after sparking a deadly feud with the Bloods in the city, they would soon also begin another war with the original mortal enemy of the Bloods in Los Angeles, the Crips. On the night of November the 30th, 2014, GDs from all over the state were in Atlanta, celebrating the GD founder Larry Hoover's birthday at the Deja Vu Sports Bar and Lounge, which was in Crip territory and likely frequented by them. While at the bar, an altercation would ensue. This exchange would erupt and spill into the parking lot, where gunfire erupted and 2 security guards were shot. Now, the court documents don't actually say who the GDs got into an altercation with, but I think it's safe to assume that it was the Crips, because in the following weeks, one of the most heinous crimes in this story would take place, with a couple of GDs going to hunt down some Crips and killing innocent civilians in the process. A couple of days after this shooting, on December the 2nd, 2014, OGKK would release a video on YouTube saying if anybody messes with Offset from the Migos, they're also messing with him.
Anybody who got a problem with my little brother Offset, man, like I say, bro, you got a problem with me.
In that same video, he would also shout out Takeoff and Quavo.
Shout out to Quavo, shout out to Takeoff. Now y'all tweet that.
As well as warning Chief Keef about dropping the rakes, which is a hand symbol that disrespects the GDs.
You know what I'm saying? Chief Keef, all that over with, man. All that over with, man.
Wait, we gotta rewind this.
Likely frequented by them. While at the bar, an altercation would ensue. This exchange would erupt and spill into the parking lot, where gunfire erupted and 2 security guards were shot. Now, the court documents don't actually say who the GDs got into an altercation with, but I think it's safe to assume that it was the Crips, because in the following weeks, one of the most heinous crimes in this story would take place, with a couple of GDs going to hunt down some Crips and killing innocent civilians in the process. A couple of days after this shooting, on December the 2nd, 2014, OGKK would release a video on YouTube saying if anybody messes with Offset from the Migos, they're also messing with him.
Anybody who got a problem with my little brother Offset, man, like I say, bro, you got a problem with me.
In that same video, he would also shout out Takeoff and Quavo.
Shout out to Quavo, shout out to Takeoff. Now y'all tweet that.
As well as warning Chief Keef about dropping the rakes, which is a hand symbol that disrespects the GDs.
You know what I'm saying? Chief Keef, all that over with, man. All that over with, man. Drop another rake and watch what happened to you, bro. Believe that, Chief. Believe that, Chief. Believe that, Chief.
Clearly, the Atlanta GDs were trying to apply pressure to anyone disrespecting them anywhere in America. But back home in their city of Atlanta, they were about to take things to a violent new level, carrying out a shooting that would rock the city to its core. Less than 2 weeks after the incident at the Deja Vu sports bar.
That's crazy.
Grill, a few GDs from Macon, Georgia, would come up with a plan to get back on their new Crip rivals. The GDs we're talking about specifically are Virtuous Wall, aka Vert, and Derek Taylor, aka D, and Marquez Patterson, aka MP, as well as Jaquez Foster. On December the 12th, 2014, according to surveillance footage, the group of GDs would show up to the Wings Cafe at 1:54 AM and immediately spot a group of Crips. You then see 2 GDs throw something at the Crips. Then you see a security guard trying his best to calm the situation down. That's when Vert would punch one of the Crips in the face, leading to the security guard spraying what looks like their spray but could be mace at both gangs. After that, a Crip member would throw a bottle towards Vert.
In the video you see 2 people shooting. One of them could be Marquez Patterson and the other Kenyatta Norris Lester. Kenyatta was sentenced for fatally shooting 38-year-old Derek Jackson at Macon's Wings Cafe, a Bloomfield Drive nightclub.
And Marquez Patterson initially killing 25-year-old Corey Hollinshed and 34-year-old George Henley, who was just the DJ at the Wings Cafe trying to make an honest living that night. And then sadly, almost a week later on December the 18th, 2014, a third man would die due to a gunshot that he sustained at the Wings Cafe that night. That man was 38-year-old Derek Jackson. The day after the shooting on December the 13th, 2014, Vert would have Derek Taylor call into the police department to report his gun being stolen before...
That's basically a mass shooting, yo.
Or the Wings Cafe shooting that had happened the day before. Ultimately, their plan didn't work, as all of the men involved were arrested and charged for these killings. None of the men actually took it to trial, and all 4 ended up pleading guilty to their crimes, with Vert, Jaquez Foster, and Marquez Patterson all getting 30 years in prison, and Derek Taylor getting 12 years, which, to be honest, are rather light sentences for a triple homicide, with these sentences likely being the result of the plea deal that these men took. But ultimately, the city was showing the Atlanta GDs that they couldn't intimidate their ops in peace. But these arrests did very little to stop the carnage going on the streets of Atlanta, and soon the gangsters there would take the war to a whole new level, embarking on yet another violent back and forth with rival gangs that once again would devolve into an all-out killing spree.
Yo, this is so sad, bro. Sometimes, like, I will say this, TrapMoreRoss, he needs to be a little bit more culturally sensitive. Like, I've seen what people say about him. Right? I've seen what people say about him. Like, he got into it with that Sony exec, right? Sony rep or whatever, the A&R from Sony, who like was internet banging for Central C. That shit whack. Like, don't listen to people like that. But I will say this: when you go back to back talking about black people killing black people, black people killing black people, black people killing black people, you got to interrupt it with a little bit of like culturally sensitive, like, and the cycle of violence that we see demonstrated here, while unfortunately it continues, is a great example of why gangbanging and the street life is, you know, something you want to avoid. All right, that being said, let's get back to the video. Like you gotta like interrupt it a little bit, because just you gotta remember that like while the majority of your audience is probably white, there's also gonna be a lot of non-white people that watch this shit, and then there's also gonna just be a lot of people that feel ill. Like sometimes I watch the videos and I just start to get sick, bro, because it's just like the cycle of violence is too crazy. It's fucking crazy, bro. Like, it's just wild. Alright.
Whole new level, embarking on yet another violent back and forth with rival gangs that once again would devolve into an all-out killing spree. Just like that, the Atlanta GDs had initiated a beef with both the Bloods and the Crips in their city. This new heat would cause the tensions in the street to turn up to new levels. And even if they wanted to, the GDs couldn't just sit around, because in some of their minds they needed to do something before something was done to them. And ultimately what unfolded was a wave of violence so brutal it would ultimately go down as the DeKalb County killing spree. Around January 2015, a young man named Tory Alston, who had an association with the Bloods, just got out of jail. He was finally able to see his daughter, who was born while he was locked up. And after getting out, Tory would talk about putting his past behind him, telling his father that his life is worth way more than this gang stuff. Sadly, he wouldn't get the chance to put the gang life behind him after all, as on May the 13th, 2015, Tory Alston was at his girlfriend's apartment, which he just moved into in an attempt to start a new life. Tory would then grab a few dollars from the room, heading outside telling his girlfriend, Fabienne Pierre, that someone was going to sell him a phone. That's when Fabienne heard gunshots. She would run outside to find Tory on the floor and a car speeding off. Tory Alston was only 20 years old when he died, leaving behind 2 children. Now, it's not exactly clear who shot Tory Alston, but his death would mark the beginning of a string of GD-related shootings in Georgia that would span throughout the summer. Less than 2 months after Tory got killed, DeMarco Franklin would sadly lose his life on July the 1st, 2015. Just a week before his death, his friend would get into an altercation with 2 GDs. According to a detective at the DeKalb County Police Department, DeMarco had nothing to do with the situation. Police say that DeMarco was walking to go and meet his child and his girlfriend at an Exxon gas station along Holcomb Road, just inside the 285 highway. That's when Quantavious Hertz, a local GD, along with another man, would walk into the Exxon and spot DeMarco along with his girlfriend and their son in the store. Immediately, they would exit the store and Quantavious would hop in the bushes and the other GD would go to the back of the store.
That's
While
crazy.
leaving, Quantavious would hop out the bushes and ambush DeMarco and his family, shooting his girlfriend and also the young baby. But sadly, DeMarco himself would lose his life. DeMarco Franklin was only 21 years old when he died, and it would later be revealed that Donald Glass, aka Smurf, would actually order Quantavious to go out and send a message. After feeling like the initial verbal altercation would make him look bad, Smurf apparently told him to handle the situation, and Quantavious would take that as to shoot someone. Once again, the city of Atlanta would not allow this violence to play out on their streets without punishment, and so Smurf was sentenced to life in prison, with Hertz sentencing not being quite clear at this stage, probably due to the fact that Quantavious Hertz was only 17 when he committed this murder. But before authorities could catch up with him, only days later, the GDs would end up in another altercation that would cost somebody their life. Only 2 days after the murder of DeMarco Franklin, another gruesome murder would occur. Edward Chadman, aka E Thugger, was a drug dealer from North Carolina who was temporarily setting up shop in the Stone Mountain area. With the intent of robbing E Thugger, 15 armed gang members would head towards Stone Mountain Inn, where Edward Chadman was dealing dope out of. But initially they would see the police there and leave. That's when Joseph Braxton, aka Lil Joe, Daniel Pena, aka Island, along with 2 other men, would head back to the Stone Mountain Inn. They would somehow make it up to the Carolina GD's hotel room, aka their trap, and it was here that an argument ensued and Island would start to fight with E Thugger for his gun. After struggling to gain control of the gun, one of the GDs, Anthony Caldwell, aka Fat, would shoot Thugger in the leg. Island would then take E Thugger's gun and shoot him with it. The bullet entered Thugger's upper right back and severed a large artery in his collarbone, and E Thugger would sadly pass away from his injuries. He was only 24 years old at the time of his death. Unfortunately, the wave of GD-affiliated violence was far from over, and that same month, another senseless incident would claim another life. At around 6:30 a.m. on July the 30th, 2015, a DeKalb County police officer responded to a call of shots fired at the Valero gas station. Once he arrived, the officer found Oliver Campbell in the driver's seat of his father's pickup truck, unresponsive. He was shot in the hand, chest, and neck. Oliver Campbell was only 20 years old and he lost his life. A fellow GD member would actually say that Lil Joe actually told him that he shot Oliver Campbell. On top of that, an investigator on the case would actually say that Lil Joe's phone was pinged by a cell tower only 1 mile away from the shooting. While alive, Oliver Campbell was actually working on his rap career, and he was part of a group called 151K, and their video for the song F&N was actually shot on the corner half a block away from Campbell's house. I'm not gonna lie, the music's pretty good. Kind of reminds me of early Chief Keef mixed with OG Atlanta trap, and it's sad that he wasn't able to see how far music could have really taken him. But ultimately, the violence was far from over, and that very same day, another incident would take place, this time.
One thing I do like about TrapMoreRoss's videos is when it comes to the music, bro, he like knows what the fuck's going on, bro. It's not like he's just some like rando from England. Like, he's a real fan, you know? So he'll be like, nah, this shit like some early Gucci. Like, and you're just like, what? And he's like, yeah, chicken talk. And you're just like, what, bro?
Touching the line.
How do you know that?
Innocent Atlanta residents. Oliver Campbell's death would coincide with another incident that happened on that same day.
Yo, this guy looks like a famous person, like J-Rock or some shit.
Left an...
I don't know if it's J-Rock, but he looks like one of them Kendrick's friends.
Another man dead, with 2 innocent women being shot. Around 8:50 p.m., just 14 hours after the murder of Oliver Campbell, Lil Joe and Island were driving through the Windview apartments, where they would spot a man who they believed was a blood, would instantly hopping out of the car, opening fire at them. He would fire back, with an innocent woman, Falana Coley, actually being hit in the leg during the gunfight, but luckily she survived. About 40 minutes after this incident, 2 men would make their way to the Landmark apartment complex, where they would spot Rockwell Nelson, sitting in the patio with his female companion, Jordan Turner. That's when Lil Joe would hop out the car, shooting both the man and the woman. Luckily, Jordan Turner would survive the shooting after balling up on the ground, but sadly Rockwell died at the scene after being shot in the face and chest. A manhunt would ensue and end up with the police finding Lil Joe in a Checkers parking lot the next day, on July the 31st, 2015. He was sitting in the passenger seat, and the police would find a .40 caliber Glock under his seat, which the driver of the car would say wasn't his. They would also seize Lil Joe's phone during the arrest, which had outgoing text messages saying they locking me up and that his strap was under the seat. Police would also find recent internet searches for Candler Road shooting 2015 and shooting at Valero gas station. He would go down for this, and Lil Joe would eventually be hit with 3 consecutive life sentences without parole plus 60 years, with Island getting sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole and an additional 40 years attached. The GDs had literally killed 5 people in the span of 2.5 months, shooting innocent people and killing a man in front of his 4-year-old baby in the process. Their campaign of bloody violence in the streets had now affected an alarming number of people, a far cry from their original intentions of remaining a peaceful and non-violent drug dealing enterprise. The exact thing they were trying to avoid with that plan ended up happening, as the city took its aim on the Gangster disciples and did everything they could to keep the dangerous gangsters off of Atlanta's streets. Just like most gangs, the downfall of this organization wasn't due to the ops, it was really due to a couple gang members who turned into informants. The first person to snitch on the Atlanta Gangster disciples was none other than Vancito Gums, a former DeKalb County police officer by day and a gun-wielding, law-breaking gangster disciple by night. On August the 25th, 2015, he would actually admit to killing people for the GDs, acting as some sort of hitman for them. Police would find evidence of Vancito warning OGKK to stay away from certain areas that the police were investigating, and even warning him to stay away from his go-to bar that was about to get raided. Then, on June the 11th, 2015, Markell White was caught burning his house down in an attempt to commit insurance fraud. He was facing serious time and would end up flipping on the gang, telling the police a number of things, even mentioning that Rick Ross allegedly paid $3 million to the GDs that were trying to extort him earlier in this video. Then, on May the 4th, 2016, 48 GD members would get indicted for racketeering and a series of crimes such as drug dealing, fraud, and even 10 murders within a 5-year span, which we've covered in this video.
The indictment alleges that during the last few years in Georgia alone, the Gangster disciples committed 10 murders, 12 attempted murders, 2 robberies, carjackings, trafficking in heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine, extortion of a rap artist, credit card fraud involving losses of up to $450,000, and even the involvement of a local police officer who reported on the activities of law enforcement to protect other members of the gang.
Ultimately, for his role in running the gang, the governor of the GDs in Georgia, Alonzo Walton, was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Virtuous Wall was sentenced to 30 years for his role in the Wings Cafe murders. Daniel Pena, aka Island, was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole, and Joseph Braxton, aka Lil Joe, would get 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. These 2 men...
This is nuts.
And faced the most time out of any of the GDs in the story due to their horrific killing spree that claimed the lives of 5 young men. Kevin Clayton, aka OGKK, was sentenced to 33 years in prison, with rapper and YouTuber Wildlife 100, who was a collaborator with OGKK, saying that they literally had to bring a tank to arrest him.
These folks done brought military tanks, armored trucks, police cars, and all type of stuff to come apprehend Atlanta OGKK from his house, bro.
His arrest in specific would actually ruffle the feathers of CBS 46 news crew, who had recently held an interview with him, painting him as an ex-gang member who was working hard to better the community.
Yesterday's multi-state gang takedown resulted in dozens of arrests, but one in particular caught my attention. Kevin Clayton, he's also known as KK on the streets of DeKalb County. He told me just months ago that he had left the street life behind.
Even advertising his foundation he created, BCF, which stands for Better Communities and Families, claiming their goal was to take young men off the streets and out of the gang life.
You got a lot of young guys here.
It's a good thing.
Yeah?
That's the best thing.
That's the best thing. Why?
Because me being the OG, they listen.
Obviously, this news crew felt disrespected after being lied to by OG KK, and they would make sure to set the record straight and make sure everybody knew the side of Kevin Clayton that he had been trying to hide.
As part of the indictment, Britt Johnson with the FBI in Atlanta says that while Gangster Disciple members like KK were serving the community, they were simultaneously victimizing it.
The other 44 gang members of
Damn, that's like I'll say this, if that shit had happened in the past, maybe he was trying to turn a new leaf. But if you're literally doing one thing on one hand and bad things on the other, that's how I used to be. I used to front. I used to be like doing good things in my day job, and then as soon as work was off, I used to be doing bad things, right? Bro, it's worse because the people that did believe in your good side are now simultaneously disappointed. And when the judge hears that shit, he's gonna be like, yo, you're full of shit. So even if you start to say that you're coming around and you're doing good things or you're changed, they're not gonna believe you. And you know, for a lot of people, that's true. A lot of people have penalties and have mistakes and all this stuff, and then they turn their lives around and then they do good things, right? So it just sucks when you see that.
GDs were charged as well for a variety of charges ranging from big to small, with the gang being sentenced to over
Rico doesn't play around, bro. Sadly, that's the one name you never want to hear.
Lost. They're still grieving friends and families that won't ever get their loved ones back. But what's interesting is that while this prominent set of GDs suffered a crushing downfall with serious sentences being handed down, the GDs overall are still just as prevalent in Atlanta today, with a crazy story coming out about them almost every year since the takedown of the 48 Gangster Disciple members we just talked about. Like in 2018, when 4 GDs attacked Chaz Watson whilst in the Muskogee County Jail. He was stabbed in the eye during an altercation. Liddell Sparks, Atavius Jones, Devontae Morris, and DeMarco Pierce, who are said to be GD, were all charged with aggravated battery. Apparently, the 4 men had a makeshift knife made out of a shower tile which they used in this brutal attack. According to the sheriff's office, Watson himself had come in gang affiliations. Then, in 2019, 5 more GDs were convicted for the torturing and brutal murder of Christopher Dean that happened in 2016. The 5 men involved in the case were Christopher Lockett, Jasper Green, Joshua Rooks, Quartez Clark, and Xavier Gibson. Prosecutors called this
Why'd they torture that man, bro?
one of the most horrific murders in recent Atlanta history, after in October 2016, Dean's body was found in the trunk of a car at the Hamilton E. Holmes metro station. Dean was beaten with a 2x4 and crowbar and even sodomized with a different object. Then he was shot twice in the back of the head, which ultimately killed him. Apparently the GDs did this after they found out that Dean was once a police informant in California, with that case actually having no relevance to the young men who committed these crimes, with them apparently doing this gross attack just based on their street principles.
Verdicts for all 5 men charged in a murder where Atlanta police say gang members tortured their victims. Fulton County DA says the murder was retaliation after the defendants found out that Christopher Dean used to be a police informant in California. The 5 men are set to be sentenced in April.
Ultimately, all 5 men...
That's terrifying, bro.
...were eventually convicted of their crimes and sentenced to life in prison. Then, as recently as 2022, 26 members of the Drug Rich Gang were indicted for a spree of home invasions which targeted Mariah Carey and other celebrities. Drug Rich Gang is a hybrid set that's made up of GDs, Bloods, and Crips, and apparently they targeted people who flaunted their wealth online. According to the indictment, members of the Drug Rich Gang actually flaunted their robberies in songs too, with lyrics like "Me and my crew striking out," possibly referring to striker cars, another term for high-value stolen cars with VINs registered to a different vehicle, as well as lyrics "Send me the drop, will kick in the house," alluding to the fact that they really will slide to commit home invasions and seemingly rap about it afterwards. Infamous Fulton County DA Fannie Willis, who's currently trying to take down Young Thug and his YSL crew, would actually famously say, "I have some legal advice. Don't confess to crimes on rap lyrics if you do not want them used, or at least get out of my county."
I have some legal advice. Don't confess to crimes on rap lyrics if you do not want them used, or at least get out of my county.
Clearly the GD's roots in Atlanta are here to stay, and unfortunately, they've left a serious legacy of violence in the city. One of the hardest things for me to wrap my head around in this video were the ages of some of the victims, with a lot of them dying before they even had a chance to legally buy a beer, raise a family, or start their careers. And what's really potent about this story was the hollow promise of the GDs to avoid violence when they started their enterprise in Atlanta. While on the one hand, it's noble to think that they never wanted so much bloodshed to come from their activities, but in hindsight, it's probably naive to think that a criminal enterprise like this can possibly even function without violence. The sad truth is that while gangs were originally formed as organizations to protect communities from other gangs and the police, the reality is that any organization that operates outside of the laws of a stable society is a slippery slope. And if a group doesn't respect the laws of the land, operating outside of them, then they can't expect justice when something goes wrong, and they'll naturally resort to delivering their own street justice. Whether just or not, if we allow gangs to make up their own rules and laws, things will always descend into chaos and violence. I have sympathy for those who are down on their luck and have to resort to trapping to put food on the table, but the gang lifestyle truly is a slippery slope. And I often wonder if many of these fallen gangsters had applied their intelligence and determination to an honest living in business or entrepreneurship, just how different their lives and communities might have been. If BMF were flipping real estate instead of flipping pies and trapping, how much bloodshed could have really been avoided? I hope this video can serve as a lesson to the next generation of Atlanta gangsters. There's plenty of legal ways to get rich. And for every gangster that lost their life trying to get ahead in the dope game, there's a talented artist like Gucci Mane or T.I. who created art that transcended that lifestyle and created a...
Yo, see, that's why I like TrapMoreRoss, right? At the end of the day, bro, he always ends the video with some positivity, man. He lets you know, like, yo, you fucking up. You in the street life, you fucking up. Off rip, you in the street life, you fucking up. He can't, like, tell somebody, like, oh, yeah, like, you know, I don't know what your life is like, so I can't tell you that, like, you know, you did the wrong thing by like selling drugs. Because, like, at the end of the day, if you're selling drugs, it's probably because you don't have other options. But I happen to know personally from my experience that I didn't need to sell drugs. I was addicted to money. I was addicted to a lifestyle as well as other substances. I was addicted to other substances, right? So I needed to keep getting high. I needed to keep buying new jeans and buying new shoes and stuff. And so for that, like the money I was making at the job wasn't always enough. I had to also make other extra money on the side, and as a result, I fucked up my life. You know, and that'll happen to more people. That'll happen to more and more people. If you don't take heed and listen to the advice that he's dropping at the end of these videos, because really there's a million legal ways to get rich, bro. There's a million legal ways to get rich. Flipping real estate, right? Having a good job and sticking to it, saving your money, right? Like, it's all out there for you to take and learn, and you can apply that same type of knowledge and hustle that you have in the streets to the boardroom or to the classroom or whatever it is, bro. So there's always something out there better to do. Guarantee you that. And it won't land you in jail or, you know, looking over your shoulder or whatever, bro. Alright, man, that's it. I can't keep reacting to this shit. That shit was a long one, man. Woo! That was a long one, brother. This is JayFlood201 Reacts. I hope you liked the video. Go subscribe to TrapMoreRoss's YouTube thing, and then you know, subscribe to his other channel. All right, definitely. Okay, subscribe to JayFlood201 Reacts. We've been watching this for a minute now. Okay, we've been watching this together. Comment, like, subscribe. Check out some of my other stuff. Okay. I play World of Warcraft. I got a couple interviews here in the video section. Alright, some music and stuff. And what else, man? I got reactions. React to the Newark drill. Okay? We're going to be reacting to more videos like this. And yeah, go follow me on IG. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.